pals, I'm here today to do a video that I probably don't need to do in terms of health for myself, but I want to do it and I thought you might find it interesting because yeah, I find this sort of thing fun. So effectively, I'm not actually reading that much at the moment because, I don't know, I find that if I'm having like a bit of a difficult time, you'd think I'd turn to reading more. I tend to read less. And yeah, I've just been feeling a little bit low lately, but also I have been playing a board game called Ark Nova, a board game I love and I got at the start of the year, and Johnny and I were playing physically a lot. I have got myself an account on Board Game Arena, which is a website where people create online versions of board games, and since then I've played Ark Nova like at least once a day every day, which takes like an hour and a half. That's Albus. So a lot of my reading time has been given over to Ark Nova. Now, to be honest, I play it so much that I could easily listen to audiobooks whilst I play because I know all the cards at this point, so I don't really need to read them. So I definitely am going to start doing that and get some audiobook time back, but it's ridiculous I'm not reading because there's just so many books I'm excited about. And something I do as a person with hobbies, and I'd be interested to know if this is something any of you do, is that I spend much more time looking into my hobbies than I do actually doing them. So all of my hobbies are like non-sporty, and so basically my main interests are reading books, watching films and playing board games. And I started to get into video games last year and haven't really got back on that bandwagon. But I spend way more time with all four of those interests. I spend way more time looking in to the hobbies, looking into what board games are coming out this year, looking into what books, video games, films, and yeah, I sort of love websites like Storygraph and Goodreads, and then there's Board Game Geek for board games, like Metacritic for films. We've just got a Mubi account for films, which is like amazing and giving me so many recommendations, but I spend way more time looking into all the things I could be doing than actually doing them. So I'd be interested to know if that's something you do. So yeah, today I am going to try some chapters out because I read a lot of frontlist at this point, and that's something I really enjoy doing. There's certainly still some backlist titles I want to read, but something I really love about frontlist, and I find this with any medium, films, TV, books. Johnny and I were funnily enough discussing this yesterday, is that I guess kind of like culturally and politically, one would hope that the art that is currently coming out is like the most progressive and the most in line with our values. And so I just tend to prefer more frontlist stuff because across all genres I think like women are better represented, and there's less harmful stereotypes and just less things that we thought were completely acceptable like 15, 20 years ago that we're now starting to question. Just like, for example, how fat people were about in books like 10 or 15 years ago was like just deeply offensive, and we all just thought it was, or nearly everyone just thought it was completely acceptable. So yeah, I read a lot of frontlist for that reason, and yeah, I enjoy a lot of frontlist. And like I said, I'm constantly looking into books. So I don't need to do this video because, as I said, I haven't been reading a lot. I have about 25 books on my TBR that I own, which isn't very many because I managed to get it down from hundreds. Then I have 20 books out from the library, 20 other books on hold from the library, and I've got, I think, around 10 books coming for my birthday in a couple of days. So I don't need to add any more books to my TBR, but I'm going to. So something I use a lot these days, or two things, is I mainly read books from the library. I only buy books if I can't get them from my library or via audio, or if they're from a favourite author, and so I just know I'm going to love it, now I'm going to want to reread it. Other than that, I use my library, and these books I have heard about from a variety of places. I'll tell you how, but my library has a copy of every single one of them. They're all frontlist, they've all come in the last few months. I'm interested in all of them, but something else I do now before I get hold of a book, if I'm slightly unsure because I have too many books to read, so I want to make sure that everything coming to the house is something I definitely want to read, I use the Kindle sample option, and I read the first chapter or so on the Kindle, and then I know from that writing style, because writing style is super important to me, whether I want to read the book or not. And so I checked, my library has all 8 of these books, and I am going to introduce them to you. Then I'm going to go away and come back, maybe today, maybe another day. It'll be this video for you, but I might be wearing something different, and talk to you about what I thought about the books and which ones I'm going to put on hold at the library and read in the future. So I'm going to talk about these 8 books in order. I've just chosen like an arbitrary way to do this that I thought might be the most interesting way for you to watch, of their Storygraph ratings. So I've looked at the average rating on Storygraph, which is my app of preference, and yeah, I've spoken about the ones from lowest rating to highest rating. Interestingly, I still have Goodreads installed as an app, and I automatically still go to Goodreads, and then I have to remind myself, like, go to Storygraph. And a few of these books have wildly different ratings on Storygraph and Goodreads. I find that I align more with Storygraph's ratings. I think perhaps maybe people who prefer like slower paced books or literary fiction use Storygraph. Also, Storygraph has half-star ratings, so I think that means that their ratings, their average ratings, are going to be like more true to what everybody thinks. So this is based on the Storygraph ratings. This first book is one I always, as I said, I look into my interests a lot, and I regularly look at what my library has recently bought, and any cover that I like the look of, I click on it and have a read of what it's about. And a few days ago, I saw this cover and thought it looked a bit interesting, and that is The Lodgers by Holly Pester, and it has an average rating of 3.15, which is quite low. And as I said, I think I've said plenty of times before, I wouldn't usually read books that have lower than like 3.6 the average rating, but I'm trying to not adhere to that too much because I've recognised that quite a few of my favourite books have a lower rating than that, and there's just something really specific about the books that work for me. And also, a lot of the times when books are given a low rating like that, they're described as sort of meandering and plotless. I'm usually okay with that. Or they have kind of a niche interest that really pulls me in, that maybe won't pull other people in as much. And I think that may be the case with this one, because this is about a young woman who has been subletting a room, and she has to leave that sublet to return to look after her mother, who I think is also renting a property because her mother is struggling, and she arrives back in her hometown to look after her mother, but she's sort of consumed by the idea of this new lodger who's taken over her sublet. And it says that the minor dramas of temporary living are prized open and ransacked in Holly Pester's irreverent reckoning with those who house us. This is a story about what it means to live and love within and outside of family structures. It is also a stunning first novel from a writer hailed as one of the best poets of her generation. So I lived in rented accommodation from the age of about 11 until a couple of years ago, and yeah, it's quite a precarious way to live. We had to move quite regularly because of that, and yeah, it feels very different. I mean, there's good things sometimes about renting. It's, you know, sometimes when something in this house breaks, I'm like, oh, this is actually my problem, I have to fix this rather than someone else. But there's an awful lot of negatives about it, and it can feel like a really precarious way to live. And I don't think a lot of books are written about that, and I'm always really interested in family dramas, in particular if they are about working class families, which I think this one is. So yeah, I'm gonna give the first chapter of that one a go. Then this next one I included as one of my most anticipated releases of the year. I will link the video where I spoke about it originally above, and I think I asked my library to buy this one actually, and then I started hearing some not so positive reviews. This has got an average rating of 3.68 on Storygraph. I think it's quite a lot lower on Goodreads. And so I had too many books up from the library, so I cancelled that reservation. But ever since I've done that, I've like sort of regretted it, and I'm just still really intrigued by the premise. And yeah, would just still like to give this one a go, even though the reception hasn't been super warm. So the premise of this is it opens in the 1980s, and we follow 3 women, Giselle Chin, Jackie Ong and Helen Ng, and they're teenagers, and it follows them through the 1980s, 1990s, all the way until the 2040s. It says it is an innovative and audacious story of 3 lifelong friends as they strive to build satisfying lives in a world that turns out to be radically different from the one that they were promised. And I love stories about women, especially like women's relationships with one another. I love books that are different perspectives and move through time. And I also think the themes in this book are really interesting. One of them is a performance artist. One of them works as a coder, and it looks at like surveillance capitalism and gentrification. So I think all those are interesting themes. I think this may be quite a slow, character-focused novel, which is something I enjoy. That may be why it's getting more negative reviews. But yeah, this is her second novel. Her first one, The Leavers, I haven't read, but I know a lot of people really enjoyed it. And then the next one has an average rating of 3.90. This is another book I saw my library had purchased. I haven't heard any reviews of it, haven't seen anyone talk about it. And that's Breakdown by Cathy Sweeney. I was pulled in by the font and the photo used on the cover, which I very much like. This is set on a winter morning, so perhaps not appropriate for a spring read, but there we go. I'm still interested in it. It opens in contemporary Dublin. This middle-class woman walks out of her suburban home when she wakes up, leaves her husband there, doesn't tell anyone, and she carries on walking for 48 hours, and we follow that journey. She takes a ferry over to Wales, and 48 hours later, she's alone in this sort of eerie landscape in this isolated cottage in Wales. It says this is a novel about the rage and reckoning of a middle-aged, educated woman who has lived her life in accordance with the expectations of society. Love what that sounds like thematically. Love any book that ends up in like a cottage, in an eerie landscape. So there's just a lot of ticks there for me. So I'm very much intrigued to see what the writing style's like with this one. And with an average rating of 3.94, we have The Start of Something by Holly Williams. I've got a few debut novels on here, two by authors called Holly, and I think probably around a similar age, in their probably late 20s, I think. That would be my guess. I think there's a lot of books coming out at this point by women who are like, a few years younger than me. I'm about to turn 34. So I saw this in Waterstones. I went in to pick up the new Sarah Perry book and I had a little glance at the tables and I liked the sound of this, but not enough to like buy it and take a risk, like I said. So I checked and my library has it. This sounds really intriguing to me. It says that this book looks at 10 interlocking sexual encounters. It questions what true intimacy and love might look like in today's world. So yeah, these people's lives collide, either romantically, from thrilling first meetings and touching moments to long-held loves or abuses of power. And it's being compared to Expectation by Anna Hope, which I really enjoyed, Normal People by Sally Rooney. I mean, I think a lot of books get compared to that, and Daisy Buchanan's Insatiable, which is a book I like the sound of and haven't read. So I like the sound of this one. I'm intrigued by it. I'm someone who enjoys short story collections, and also I enjoy short story collections when they are interlinked. So especially if they're sort of linked through the characters rather than like an overarching theme. So I think this one will be an interesting one, although this one might be harder to tell from just the first chapter because I'm assuming it will be like a standalone story. This next one has an average rating of 4.02 and that is Meet Me at the Surface by Jodie Matthews. Again, I saw this in my library's catalogue, saw the cover. Books that have this type of cover can be dime a dozen and kind of generic, but I thought, I do like that title, so I have a look. And I assumed this would be historical based on the cover and the title. I don't think it is, but it's very much mired in sort of folklore and myth, which I like. It has a blurb by Kieran Millward Hargrave, so I think it's maybe going to be reminiscent of her historical works. It says, we're following a woman called Merrin, who grew up on the wilds of Bodmin Moor, raised by her mother and her aunt in an old farmhouse. I mean, there's just a lot of ticks going on for me already. Here, the locals never leave the decaying village, fear for the future of their farms, and cling desperately to the folkloric tales that are woven into their history, except for Merrin, who escaped to Manchester University. But she's returning home for the memorial service of her ex-girlfriend Claude, and she finds her home stranger and more secretive than ever. She thinks that her mother's hiding something, she thinks that the villagers are going out at night, and then she finds this old notebook that she thinks is somehow linked to Claude. So yeah, this is playing with a lot of tropes that we usually see in historical fiction, but I think putting that in a modern setting with a queer story. So yeah, I'm intrigued by this one. Interested to see what the writing style's like. I think this could be one I would really enjoy. Then another one I saw in my library's catalogue and was pulled in by the title and the cover. I like these kind of long, kind of ominous titles, and that is This Is How You Remember It by Katherine Prasivka. I think this is another debut novel. No, it isn't. Her first novel was None of This Is Serious, and I remember that coming out a couple of years ago, although I haven't read it. I'm going to read you the blurb of this one because it's written in a quite an interesting way, and it very much pulled me in. And again, think the author may be around a similar age to me because of, you'll hear, when I read the blurb, you'll understand why I say that. You're 9 when you get your first computer. I was also 9 when we got our first computer. Your favourite thing is a virtual pet website. You spend hours in the chat room. You don't understand why some of your online friends don't use their real name. It's not long before you discover porn. You don't know what you're watching, but you do know that you shouldn't tell anybody. Later, older, your first kiss is captured on camera and shared with everyone in your year. It feels like betrayal, but soon it feels normal, part of the incessant cycle of posting, sharing and liking. Now you can't remember a time when you didn't feel hollow inside. Now you know that something has to change. Chilling, potent and intensely intimate, this is how you remember it, is at once a cautionary tale, a call to arms and a tender love story. It is about a life lived online, about finding another way when it's all you've ever known. So yeah, sounds really interesting, incredibly different to my connection with getting a computer, because my mum was very good at sort of policing our internet usage. And if people remember back in the day, if you were on the internet, then people couldn't ring the house phone, and that meant we weren't allowed to be on the internet for very long because people were trying to call and have a chat with my mum. So I will always remember the dial-up modem sound and the frustration of losing connection because like your mum's friend had just called to speak to her. So there is that one. Then with an average rating of 4.33, we have Real Americans by Rachel Cohn. This was also on my most anticipated books of the year video, and this is also a second novel from a successful author. I wrote her first book, Goodbye, I'd say Vitamin, but it's an American book, so it's Goodbye Vitamin. And I enjoyed it and thought I would give one of her other books a go. And I really like the sound of this premise, and it's got a really good high rating, but I've heard a couple of people who I think I have similar reading taste to say this was kind of average. And so I, again, cancelled my hold because I had too many books out, but then I still feel interested in it. And yeah, still like the sound of the premise, and it has got a really good average rating. So I'm still gonna try this first chapter and see how I feel. Again, this is a multiple POV story. This spans 3 generations. It opens on the precipice of Y2K in New York, and we're following 22-year-old Lily Chen. She's an unpaid intern. She meets this white man called Matthew and has a child with him. Then we jump to 2021 when their son Nick Chen is being raised by his mother, doesn't know who his father is, but really wants to find out. And then we, I think, go back to Mao's China and watch her mother's story about how she moved over to America with her daughter. It says this weaves a profound tale of class and striving, race and visibility, family and inheritance, a story of trust, forgiveness, and finally coming home. So yeah, I'm intrigued, like I said. I'm hearing sort of mixed things, but I still think I should give it a chance and try the first chapter. And lastly, with an average rating of 4.41, we have The Night Alphabet by Joelle Taylor. So I had a few people talk about this. I hadn't been aware of it before, and I've had rave reviews. And initially I thought, I'm not interested in that. Like, I think it sounds like a little bit gimmicky. But then I just kept hearing positive reviews, and I was like, you should give it a go. So I thought I'd add it to this TBR. But in all honesty, I haven't read the blurb because I just listened to people's initial description. And I guess I hadn't listened to the full review because I didn't really realise the complete premise of this book. I thought the premise was that this was about a woman who walks into a tattoo parlour to get her final tattoo. Her whole body is inked. She has tattoos all over her body. And then the book then splits into short stories all about the different tattoos she has, where and when she got them, why she got them, and sort of tells the story of this one woman's life through her tattoos. And I thought, it sounds a little bit gimmicky. And also, like, as someone who has a few tattoos, I'm against the premise that like all of your tattoos have to mean something. And so yeah, like as a notion of a novel being surrounded by that, I'm not completely sure if I'm on board, but I haven't read it, so I don't know if that's where it goes with it. But what I didn't realise is that this book is set in 2233. So it says, we visit the dystopian cities of the Quiet Men, the coal mines of 19th century Lancashire. We join a gang of vigilante sex workers, enter the world of an incel murderer, haunt the old Maryville gay bar, and uncover plans to genetically modify female children. Each of the stories brings us closer to Jones's truth and how her life is intricately interwoven with that of the woman tattooing her body. It spans geographies and time spans, and it's a deep investigation into human nature and violence against women. So I feel more intrigued now. I didn't realise it was a bit of a sort of sci-fi novel, I guess. And I'm assuming that it follows someone who can like move through time periods and stuff. So that sounds interesting, and like I said, it's getting incredibly positive reviews. So I'm going to go and read those first 8 chapters, and then I'll come back and feedback to you which ones I plan to read, and then maybe I'll talk about them in order of like excitement, which ones I think I'm the most confident that I will enjoy and which ones I want to prioritise. Obviously, me wanting to prioritise them does not necessarily mean that I'll be able to get them in that order, because I'm going to use the library, and so for example, the last 2 will definitely be more popular and there'll probably be a bit of a wait list on them. So I'll probably end up reading them in the order they arrive, but yeah, I will tell you how excited I am for each of them regardless. Okay, so it's now a couple of hours later, the light has changed, and I am here to check back in about the first chapters. I didn't necessarily always read the first chapter because some were like super long and I didn't want to read that much of a book, and some were like shorter, so yeah, I read varying lengths of each one. So after 8 books, I'm interested in reading 6 of them, which I think is pretty good, and funnily enough, the 2 that I don't want to read were the ones with the lowest average rating and the highest average rating on Storygraph. So yeah, they just ended up happening, and there's kind of a similar reason for why I don't want to read both of these, and that is that I really didn't like their use of metaphors. I'm someone who, I don't like when like metaphors and similes feel really stretched or really awkward or really overwritten. And so, for example, I know loads of people love Julia Armfield's writing, and I read her short story collection years ago and thought it was okay, but I tried to read her novel Our Wives Under the Sea that loads of people adored and couldn't bear the metaphors. So yeah, this is a book, The Lodgers by Holly Preston. I started reading it and I didn't really feel much for the writing. I thought it felt a little bit kind of awkward at points, but then I got to this bit and I just kind of winced a couple of times. She's talking about these bags she's been carrying and how heavy they've been. And she said, just to hold all a rucksack and some canvas sacks, now deflated like invalid lambs. And I don't know, like sometimes when I hear a metaphor like that, I just think, I don't know, like I don't think that you're getting me to picture what you want me to picture. I don't think that works. And then she carries on and she says, it made me feel stupid. If only it was only my armpits that cried. You would cry if you were my armpit, straining under that rubbish all day. And I think she means the weight of carrying the bags, the stress. But yeah, I don't know, like an armpit crying, the sentences just felt really awkward and clunky to me, so I carried on for a couple more pages. There was more writing like that, not into it, so not gonna try and read that one. And then the other one is The Night Alphabet by Joelle Taylor, which, as I said, has really amazing reviews. I think it did say that she was a poet, so I had some concerns because I do sometimes find that poets tend to have a really overwritten style. They use an awful lot of metaphors and similes that I just find a bit cringe, and that is the case here. The book opens and you're trying to get your bearings. It's clearly this kind of future where she's moving through a world of like oh my god, what is the word? I can't think of the word, like computer generated images, and like it changes seasons, and as she's walking her body keeps morphing and changing, so it's all kind of confusing. She says the son drinks too much and can't take criticisms. There's sort of descriptions like that, like giving personality to seasons and stuff, which I'm not a massive fan of. But then here's an example. It says, when I take her hand, I can feel the flutter of a pulse and wish I could keep it right there in my inside pocket, or I can take it out and set it free later, watch it fly across the endless rooftops of this infinite city. And so I know lots of people might hear that and think that that's kind of beautiful, but I just find that writing to be just overly floral and romantic, kind of meaningless, and yeah, not a fan. So I felt kind of disconnected from the narrative, and I think you're supposed to because you don't really know what's going on, but I just didn't like the writing style either. It described a tattoo as a butterfly unpinned, which again, I just think is a bit too twee and romantic for me, so I won't be reading that one. Now, to be honest, it would be hard to rank the other 6 against one another because I'm interested in reading all of them, And I think if I had all 6 of them now in front of me, it would be more down to my mood of what I felt like reading than thinking that any of them had like particular merits over the other. So interestingly, the one I read the most of and the one I felt like I wanted to keep turning the pages, and I was glad the sample was a certain length, was one that, had I known what that story was beforehand, I wouldn't have thought it would be the one I was most keen to read right now. And that is The Start of Something by Holly Williams. Now, I think the reason I read the most from that sample is because this is the book that is this sort of collection of short stories that are, each short story is a different sexual encounter, and I think we're going to sort of come across these different characters. But I guess because it was in part a full story, I sort of wanted to see the arc of that narrative, whereas all the other sections I read were just sort of introductions. And I'm also interested because like there was a secondary character introduced who wasn't part of the sexual encounter that I was being told in the story, and like I'm kind of interested in that person and interested to see if they crop up again. The reason I wouldn't necessarily think that this would be the one I'd be interested in is because I predominantly read books about women, nearly always written by women, and this is the only story where it's told from the perspective of a man. And it's kind of like a bit bleak and depressing, and that's something I'm not always a fan of, but in particular, like I'm not a fan of when it's told from like a man of this age who's kind of like feels kind of lonely. It's about him going on Tinder and trying to find someone to meet for the evening to make a connection because he feels really lost. And he's living in this really small rented flat after his girlfriend's left him, and he's just trying to find a connection. And you sort of follow this evening where he goes on this Tinder date, and you find out some things about him which I won't spoil. So yeah, I'm not usually interested in that type of character, but I don't know, there was something about the writing style that really pulled me in. The writing about those type of Tinder dates where, you know, these people are like, are we both just agreeing to meet to have sex, but we don't want to like be brazen enough to say that, and the sort of dancing around that I thought was really interesting. And yeah, I was interested in where it went. So there wasn't necessarily anything that really stood out to me about the writing as being particularly beautiful or anything about the characters that I particularly love. But yeah, it just felt like a full story and I was interested, and I felt propelled by it. So definitely want to carry on with that one. Then I read the shortest amount of Meet Me at the Surface by Jodie Matthews, because quite a lot of these books have quite long opening chapters. This is one of the only ones that had a short opening chapter, and I felt like I got enough of a sense of the book and already knew I wanted to read it just from like those 5 pages. So in this, there is a prologue. You're watching a farmer who is out on the moors with his dog, and he sees something moving across the moors that looks like, initially he thinks they might be a homeless person, then he thinks they're a boy, but he says there's something about their body that's moving kind of jerkily. It looks like they're carrying lots of bags on their back, and it sort of feels kind of eerie. And then you're told that it's like a woman of the moors and she's being welcomed back and the moors know her. So that was a really interesting prologue. It's only a page or so. And then you go to the main character who has returned from university, and she is on the moors and is sort of being welcomed back by the moors, and she's introducing you to this part of the moors where she's climbed up to this rock and she's overlooking this landscape, and she can see the house in the distance where her aunt and her mother are, and she doesn't want to go back. And yeah, it's just sort of introduces you to her point of view. It feels really eerie, and just like thematically, I can tell this is a book that I could really get on board with. Like I said, I'm really interested in loads of things about this book. I love books set in sort of like big old crumbling houses. I love books set in kind of like moody, rural or isolated landscapes. I'm interested in folklore and that sort of gothicness to these type of stories. But in particular, I'm interested that this is told in like a modern setting from the perspective of a queer woman, and I don't think that's something we get a lot when we think of the gothic and the rural. So yeah, I am really intrigued by this one as well, and will definitely be borrowing it from the library. I guess one of the ones that I am a bit unsure about, so I'm still gonna give this one a go, but and it's a hard one. Sometimes when you're trying a Kindle sample, and they have longer chapters. I think sometimes I feel unsure because like I'm not quite sure where to stop, and then I guess I feel like I'm not pulled in because I'm being compelled to stop, but it's more that I don't want to get too far into a book when I might not be able to actually read it for like a month or so once I've waited at the library. So yeah, I thematically, this book, as I thought, will definitely work for me. It opens in the 80s. We're following from the perspective of one young girl whose family, I think, were from the Philippines, and she meets two other girls at a sort of a summer barbecue, and this friendship starts to be formed, I guess. And then yeah, she's just sort of telling you about her life as a teenager in the 90s. And so this is one of the ones that's going to be the most changeable, right? Because this is the one where we follow all three perspectives, all three girls as they become women, and we follow them through the 90s, the 80s, the 90s, and then all the way to 2040. But in this introduction to this character, she's the one who becomes a performance artist, and she's starting to talk about the art she starts creating when she's young, and she's commenting as an older woman and with this sort of hindsight of knowing where her art goes. And yeah, I felt comfortable in this voice. I love reading from the perspective of young girls. I love reading about friendship between young girls and women. And I don't think I've read a book that talks about art from somebody before they're already an adult, talks about the formation of an artist and the type of art they create when they're young. I think I've probably read about a lot of people who write when they're young, but not people who create art. So I think that's going to be kind of interesting. But yeah, like this is one that, because the start was kind of like just an introduction to her and it hadn't really got going plot wise, I'm not like super desperate to get to this one. I think some of the other ones I've just spoken about had a bit more of a hook at the start where like I want to see where it's going. It's hinting more at what's to come, and feels like the characters on more of a precipice, whereas this is more of an introduction to these characters and this world they inhabit. But certainly still want to read it. And yeah, I felt like I didn't, this is the type of writing style, just from the section I read, where I didn't think at any points, oh, that's really great, but I also didn't think, oh, I don't like that. So this is one that I think I would read more for the themes and what it's going to explore than the writing style itself. But I will be requesting this one from my library as well. Then another one that had quite a long opening section, so again, I sort of read half of the first chapter, is This Is How You Remember It by Katherine Prasifka. This is the one where she gets the internet when she's a 9-year-old, and yeah, sort of her life becomes really watched, and it's about what it's like growing up into girlhood and womanhood with the internet all around you, and how sort of dangerous that can be, and how it really changes her attachment to her body, really. And it's written like the blurb was, so it's written in the second person. It's all you did this, you did that, and it felt super nostalgic to me. I grew up in a coastal town. We spent a lot of the summer holidays on the beach, and it opens with them driving up to the coast and her getting out of the car. She's 7 years old and they've just got a video camera for the first time, and she's super excited about it. And it's this annual family get together they do on the beach, and she's walking down the path to the beach and she's recording everything. And just the way she describes the camera and how big it is and how clunky to use it was, and like the things she's saying, just really remind me of like the videos we filmed when I was 7, 8, 9, when family video cameras had just become a thing. And you look back at them now and you're like, God, you show people the most like mundane things. And it was because it was so new. It was so odd. It felt so special to have a video camera, to be able to actually record and document your life. We always laugh because Johnny's family, we all talk about this together about, and none of us can actually find, I haven't seen these sort of family videos for years, and Johnny can't find his either, so we're always trying to talk to people and find out where they are. But Johnny and his sisters always laugh because they went on a holiday to Florida, and it probably would have been, I think Johnny was 5, so 1994, and they'd got a video camera. And he said there's this scene where they're in the hotel and their grandparents went with them, and his granddad is just filming the motorway and filming all the American cars so they can show it to their uncle when they get back home. And it's so boring. Like, I watched it years ago and it's like really, really boring. But like it was such a thing then that like you'd never been able to do this before, and so like it all felt really interesting, and you just comment on everything you saw, and so that felt really nostalgic, and like the being on the beach felt really nostalgic. And yeah, I liked the voice, but it was quite slow to start, and so I didn't feel super compelled to read this one really soon, but I am still interested enough that this is one I want to read. And I think this is going to be one, I flicked ahead a little bit to see like where the chapter ended up, and it looked like it was her mum already sort of saying things like, oh, you shouldn't sit like that, like I've just watched this clip on the camera and you shouldn't sit with your legs apart like that, and she's 7. And so I think it's going to start being quite hard-hitting and quite, there's going to be quite a lot of commentary from quite early on, which I think will be interesting. So again, do definitely still want to read this one, and there's quite a few here I've realised that are about, that open with the perspective of a young girl. So yeah, that was another one. Then we have 2 more left. One is Real Americans by Rachel Khong. This opens with a prologue set in 60s China, very short, which I think is going to be about the mother of Lily, and then it opens in the first chapter is 1999 from the perspective of Lily Chen when she meets the man who becomes her son's father. And this felt really just recognisable to me as a book about like young woman coming of age. She's in New York, she's an unpaid intern, she's at like an office party and she meets this man. So it felt really like recognisable. I feel like I've read loads of books that have this as some, some part of the opening, and then it's gonna then lead into like where their life goes from here. I enjoyed her writing in Goodbye Vitamin, and I think she's got kind of like a deftness of touch. I remember in Goodbye Vitamin, she was very good at blending emotions that don't necessarily go together, like grief with comedy or with levity. And so yeah, I just think this will probably be like a really readable book. And so again, this writing style was one I read and thought like there's nothing really bad about it, there's nothing really good, but I immediately felt I warmed to Lily and wanted to know her story. And so again, I will be reading this one, although I assume there'll be quite a long wait at the library for this one as well. And then the last one is Breakdown by Cathy Sweeney, and this is again one of the ones that I think has a bit more of a propulsive opening, and this immediately made me think, perhaps unfairly because it's another Irish novel, of Soldier Sailor by Claire Kilroy, which is shortlisted at the moment for the Women's Prize. Now the reason it made me think of it is because Soldier Sailor is about a new mother, and she is writing the book to her son, who she calls Sailor, and she's sort of telling him about the early years of his life and how much he struggled and how just difficult it was. And it reads kind of like a scream of rage. Now this kind of reads like a woman 15 years later, because it opens and at points she talks in the first person, but at points she talks like she's setting the scene, and like she says like the woman did, the mother did, and then she'll talk in the first person. And I like that sort of blend of voices. But it opens, as the description said, with her waking up beside her husband and just being like, fuck it, I don't want to do. And she describes what her normal morning routine would be. It sounds like she's super done with it, like so over it. There's also, just in that first chapter, quite a few comments that make you aware that she manages the household, sorts everything out for her children. She goes downstairs in the morning and she mentions that like her husband's just left all of his stuff all over the sofa, and he's left a bit cheese board on the side, and like he's left some meat out in the fridge and it smells. So you get the sense in Soldier Sailor how she's just kind of furious at everybody. In this, it feels like more tired fury, like she's just tired of it all. And rather than this kind of simmering rage, this rage that's been buried for so long, so deeply, that finally it's just kind of peeked its head above the parapet and she's sort of given into it almost. And yeah, she's just decided to get in the car and drive. And one concern I had in the blurb of this is that it said she was a middle-class woman. I tend to prefer reading about working-class characters, and if not, then I want there to be commentary on any privilege within the novel, and there certainly is with this. she kind of mocks the community she lives in. She lives in quite a wealthy community, and she mocks it and kind of basically says like, houses either have like matching hanging baskets on either side of the porch, or they have matching potted bay trees, which like I can completely see the estate she's describing. And yeah, she's kind of mocks the fact that this is the life her husband has striven for, and he's entirely comfortable and happy in it all, and this kind of comfort of wealth is exactly what he wanted, and she's just completely unhappy in this tedium that is her life. And yeah, I felt really interested by the voice. She makes a comment in the first chapter as she pulls out of the drive of the house that she will never come back to this house, or she'll never see this house again. And she has school-aged children still, and I think we've started having much more nuanced discussions about mothers leaving their children. I think there is still, it's still one of the world's biggest taboos. We accept fathers leaving their children every day. We accept men doing the bare minimum as parents all the time. And if a woman does just a little bit less, society is aghast. And so I think it's interesting that it's already set up that she's not going to go back. So initially you're thinking, well, what does that mean for your children? Like, what does that mean? And even that, like, it makes you think, would I think that if it was the dad leaving and all this? So it's interesting. So I think it's going to be asking interesting questions, things that I like to think about more and challenge the sort of norms we have as a society. So yeah, I'm interested in this one. So I feel like it's been a pretty good selection of books. 6 out of the 8, like I said, is really good. It's interesting that the 2 I don't want to read. Both of them are kind of for the same reason, of that kind of writing style I don't like, with that overuse of metaphors and stuff. Like I said, some of you might have really liked those sections I read out, and if so, those books are definitely for you. And yeah, I think it's interesting that noticing that with some books what pulls me in is the themes being explored, and I don't really think much about the writing style. And I would notice writing style if it bothers me. So like, the writing style's good, it's just not, perhaps, at least in that initial section, doing anything super noticeable to me in like a positive way. Whereas in some of the other excerpts I read, the writing style was more noticeable. I guess in Breakdown, maybe the writing style felt a bit more experimental than in some of the others. So yeah, I think 6 out of the 8 is pretty good going. I'm happy with that. I'm going to request them all at the library now, and we'll see which ones come in first. I would think, my guess is that I will wait a while for Memory Peace and Real Americans, but I reckon the others I won't have to wait that long for, but I could be completely wrong now, and Norfolk could have asked for all of these books. There could be loads of other people who look at all the newly purchased books and have asked for all of these ones. So yeah, let me know if you enjoyed this video. If the books come in at a similar time, I may try and do one video where I wrap all these up together, because it might be interesting to, like, you know, see this through to the end. But that all depends on the order they come in at the library. I'd love to know if you've read these books and what your thoughts were on them. And yeah, I'd also love to know what new releases you're excited about, what new releases you've read lately, and what books you've been borrowing from your library. Thanks so much for watching. The sun has just gone down behind the house opposite, so I think it's an ideal time to finish this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.